Loneliness is considered a health issue. It can literally kill you. If we look at the research, happiest places to live are those medium-sized rural and regional areas where they're big enough to kind of have what you want, but not so big that you get totally lost.
Should happiness be the goal?
You need some pain or discomfort to have the gain, to have the joy and happiness. But
Dr. Tim Sharp
is an internationally renowned psychologist and best-selling author.
Also known as Dr. Happy.
He founded the Happiness Institute devoted to enhancing happiness in individuals, families, organizations, and their leaders,
while boosting resilience and optimism.
depression isn't one thing. It's talked about as this one type of illness, but it's not. By far the majority of people who are experiencing depression as a result of what we might call psychosocial factors, lifestyle factors, thinking, cognitive factors, etc. And as a result, the solution for them is 80 or 90% of people with sleep problems will have insomnia. And then for 80 or 90% of them, the main cause is worry or stress.
But what are some things that people can be doing if they're struggling with their sleep?
There's a couple of things that can really help. One of the most important things for sleep is routine. And that includes sort of warm up to sleep period and then the sleep period. And what we know from the research is that at least 90 minutes before that, you want to...
We were talking about this a little bit before. I put a post up yesterday about Sydney, the feeling of everyone's in a hurry. There was lacking a little bit of, the smile. Do you think the inner city, not just Sydney-based, but around the world, the rat race, I guess, quote unquote, call it, with a lot of people who understand what we're talking about here, can develop a level of unhappiness in people?
Look, I don't know if it's unhappiness. Well, I'll answer based on personal experience and then sort of cite a bit of research, I suppose. I certainly know that when my wife and I love sort of traveling to rural regional areas around, particularly New South Wales, and you definitely notice it when you get to smaller towns or even those sort of medium towns. I guess a level of friendliness. I think it's definitely noticeable. People are a bit more approachable and do smile a bit more. That's just anecdotal, obviously, but I think many people would have experienced something similar. If we look at the research, there is some good research that shows the quote-unquote happiest places to live are those medium-sized rural and regional areas where they're big enough to kind of have what you want, good coffee, good movies, good stores, whatever, but not so big that you get totally lost. And I think that, Sydney's obviously a big international city, particularly the CBD is big. People are busy. They're often rushing, rightly or wrongly. And I think people can get lost in that sense of I've got to get from A to B and forget that there's a person there who, might need some help or might even just want to smile.
Yeah. It's interesting because, coming from a place like Adelaide, that's probably that medium sort of place. Even though it is a city, you start to feel a little bit like that as well. So it's not the full extent. If you're like small country town, you're like, okay, well, this may breed some unhappiness in the sense of there's not opportunity here for me, or the favorite cafe. You might just have to get a coffee from the bakery as well. So would part of that be because people maybe feel like they have to be working to survive in a place like this with it's more expensive and all that, might be from a place of, I just got to do what I got to do?
Oh, look, I think there's a lot of factors. I think when we look at... So I suppose you've got to go back a few steps and define happiness. Because when I referred to that research earlier, and there's a lot of research into this, they often use the term happiness in a different way to the way we might use it conversationally. So, most of us, when we're talking about happiness, or if you just stop someone on the street and ask them about happiness, what they'll usually think about is a form of positive emotion. So we know there's a whole range of positive emotions, and happiness is one of them, but there's also, joy and contentment and satisfaction and love, etc., etc., etc. And they're all good, but happiness is just one of them. What we also know about those positive emotions is they're fleeting. They come and go, and like any emotion, even like anxiety and anger, they usually come and go within, it depends on the intensity, but within minutes often. So, but what positive psychology, the science of happiness, is really about is a deeper level of thriving and flourishing. And what that research is really about is often even more than that, or different to that again, which is more about quality of life. So we're talking about a whole bunch of related but sometimes distinct and different constructs here. And certainly in the big city, I suppose, what we see, there are significant cost of living pressures, there's significant work stresses, people's values and priorities change a bit, I suppose, not always for the good. And I think, I think we're seeing sort of some combination or mixture of all of those things.
What are some other factors then that would positively affect your ability to feel that broad term of happiness?
Well, also there's a whole range of factors. And one of the things I talk a lot about, there's no one secret to happiness. I get asked all the time, what's the secret to happiness? Or what's one thing you'd say? What's one piece of... There isn't just one thing. And even if there was one thing, for me, it'd be different for you. Different people, different backgrounds, etc. So there's a whole bunch of things that we know contribute to whether you call it happiness or a good life. But if you look across all the research, not just in positive psychology, but if you look at health and well-being and longevity and all these different things, the number one factor almost every time is connectedness or quality relationships. And I think that's what you see in those, and again, the small to medium-sized regional, rural areas, is a really strong sense of community. And I think, it seems strange that in a big city where there's more people, we sometimes feel disconnected. But that's what, that's almost certainly the most significant contributor to happiness and well-being is connectedness, relationships, community, belonging, that whole collection, which are super, super important.
Yeah, which has arguably probably become a lot harder in the last few years because, like we were talking about before, the more working from home, so the less, if you've not got that quote unquote circle already, or you've maintained your friendships from school or whatever it may be, university, it's probably going to continue to get harder to find that connection, I would imagine.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. It's people, there's a lot of people now talking about this epidemic of loneliness, and many sort of public health researchers who look at this stuff on a global level believe that it either is or will soon become the biggest health issue. So, like, loneliness is considered a health issue. It can literally kill you. When we look at people who are lonely compared to people who are connected, they'll die younger. If you control for other variables. So it is a very, very significant issue. And interestingly, some people argue that social media is not really social. Or the connections we make online, they can be good and they can be helpful. And I certainly believe there's pros and cons to everything, and there is good to social media.
Yeah, definitely.
But it's not the same. Connecting someone online, messaging someone online is probably better than nothing. It's better than not having anyone to talk to. But it's not the same as in person, in real life. We don't get the same sorts of benefits. And I think many of us need to be wary of that, because it is very easy, to sit at home. It's comfortable, it's easy, we don't have to take any risks, and you can still message your friends. But again, we don't get the same benefits that we need for a long and good life.
I think it's interesting because even it's very easy, like let's say take like you said, you could just message, or we could FaceTime, or the common one might be like, oh, we'll just hop on the video game together and we'll have a chat there. It's like, as much as you can, and you're still going to probably have a great experience, chat some shit and have some fun with your friends, you're missing so much. So sometimes just bite the bullet, go out, play some golf, go for a walk, get a coffee, even if it means, getting a drink, not everyone drinks, or go out for a meal, whatever it may be. There's going to be many other factors that benefit that as well. Like, a simple one would be you go for a walk, you get the sun and fresh air as well. There's other things and other stimulus that come along for the ride then as well.
100%. And that's, so, again, if you go back to social media, it's a very complex issue, so probably don't have time, or it's not necessarily relevant to talk about all of it now. But what's my understanding of the research is that the best way to use social media is to stay connected to people so you can see them in real life, not just so you see them online. That should kind of only be the first step in a sense.
I've heard a really interesting quote that you put up on your Instagram the other day. I think it was a snippet from your new book. Real happiness isn't always about doing nice and pleasant things. Perfection and overwhelming comfort might seem like good ideas or goals worth pursuing, but in reality, they're not. Why is that the case?
Yeah, well, that's kind of the essence of my book, Lost and Found. Well, I guess I give two examples, or I'll give you one example of that now, which is when years ago now I went skydiving. Have you ever been skydiving?
Yeah, it's the best thing ever.
Best thing ever, but also the worst thing ever. So I still think it was one of the most thrilling, exhilarating experiences of my life, no doubt about it. But it was also one of the most terrifying experiences. And I use that as and so anyone that's been skydiving or bungee jumping or something similar can relate to it. I think, you wouldn't be normal if you weren't scared a bit. Like it's a perfectly normal human response when you're however many 10,000 feet in the air, you're jumping out of a plane. Of course you're going to be terrified. Of course you're going to be scared. But it's also, I've never had the excitement and exhilaration and pure joy, in a sense, in any other context. And not everyone wants, my wife, for example, is just not interested in that. And a lot of people aren't. And that's fair enough. But they've probably experienced something similar where doing something difficult or uncomfortable, they're almost like two sides of the same coin, has at the same time been pleasurable or satisfying in some way or other. And so I guess the point is, if we don't ever put ourselves in a position of discomfort, if we don't ever extend ourselves beyond our comfort zone, we won't have the opportunity for those things, those joyous, exhilarating experiences, which is, I think, really important.
Yeah, it's a hard one though as well, because you want to create like a life that has that comfort, And then so maybe you achieve your goals, what you set out for there as well. Or even in the process of setting those goals, you said you want to step slightly beyond, but how do you make sure you're not setting wildly unrealistic expectations? And maybe some people can deal with a bigger buffer than others can because they can deal with stress a little bit better. But is that a massive challenge then as well? Is that those expectations are mildly realistic?
Oh, definitely, and it's going to differ for different people. Obviously, we all have different risk profiles, and we have different. Some people prefer those sort of high energy or high arousal forms more than others, and that's fine. Again, we're all different. But I suppose it's about finding that balance, and I'm not suggesting people should go to that level of that intensity of terror and exhilaration every minute of every day. That you'd burn yourself out very quickly. But it is about doing that at times that are appropriate for you and in a way that's appropriate for you and at a level that's appropriate for you, and which again will differ for different people.
Yeah, I find, and it's probably a lot of my listeners would be quite probably more in their 20s or 30s, so they're probably still on that discovery sort of level as well, much like myself, only at 24. And I really struggle with that balance of setting those goals that are realistic, but also you want to like shoot for the moon, but then also I'm like sitting here and I'm like, well, does my life have to be that goal? Should happiness be the goal, or am I trying to pursue something of major purpose, which may mean that, hey, some level of happiness will have to disappear? Like that's, I don't know, like it feels like there's a bit of honor in that, but do I need to do that? Like it's a really hard thing to navigate.
100%, perfect. And that's, in that complex, long-winded question, that's essentially what it's all about, finding the answer to that. I suppose, like in the personal training or I go to the gym and exercise regularly, and, there's that old saying, no pain, no gain. I like that, but I don't like that. Like I think there's some, but that's kind of what this is about, that, there is some pain or discomfort. You need some pain or discomfort to have the gain, to have the joy and happiness. But, if you took that into the gym, for example, and if you were just inflicting pain every minute of every day, you probably injure yourself.
Yeah.
So like all things, there's a balance and you need boundaries around it. And as you quite rightly said, it's not just about feeling good all the time. Any of us, and I'm sure there's everyone to some extent, who's set and worked towards a long-term goal knows that there's going to be blood, sweat and tears, like literally or metaphorically, that not every, whether you're training for a marathon or a triathlon, or whether you're writing a book or completing a degree or whatever, not every minute of that's going to be fun, and it shouldn't be. Why should it be? But hopefully the end result, that sense of satisfaction and accomplishment, is worth it. So we shouldn't expect to be or trying to be happy every minute of every day. That would be, it's kind of absurd in a way.
Yeah. And a prime example then there, you've just released a new book. How did you navigate those emotions, the ups and downs of writing that book? Like you said, you weren't happy probably all the time in creating it. How did you navigate that yourself?
Well, that's a little. I actually love writing, so and this is my 7th book, so I'm quite used to the process and I enjoy the process. So the process of writing for me, to be perfectly honest, it isn't actually that difficult. What is difficult for me is the next stage, the editing process, which I really don't like.
Yeah.
I like to get it all down, and I think I'm quite good at that. I send it off, and for those who don't know, it then goes to the publisher and the editors, and and it goes through 2 or 3 iterations where eventually, so first year they're sort of looking at the big picture and the structure, and then eventually you get down to like every full stop and every comma. And I don't like it. I hate that level, but it has to be done.
Yeah.
So I suppose for me, that's the pain for me. I mean, people's pain points will be at different stages of that. And then there's also for me, the frustrating stages. So for those who don't know how it works, we finished all this 6 or 9 months ago. And it takes that long for the book to actually come on the shelf. So that's a frustrating process of just waiting for the publishers to go through, do what they do. They have to do, get the cover design and all that stuff. So there's different parts of it that are more frustrating. But I suppose to answer your question is, I just try to see that as part of the process. It's a necessary part, and there are some bits that I enjoy more than others. Just like other people will find that with other goals. There'll be some bits that are they find easy, that are really enjoyable, where they experience a sense of flow, and other bits that are a bit more of a slog. But you can't have the joy without the slog.
Yeah, and I guess the more you do the reps, like you said, it's the 7th book, the more your expectation, like your first book, you may have had an expectation that was going to be perfect, smooth sailing, whatever. Then you get hit with this, we have to do the editing, and there's a level of disappointment potentially there. Whereas now, book number 7, you're like, I know what to expect. It doesn't mean that I don't feel some of those feelings or emotions, but you're a little bit more aware and ready for them then, I guess, as well.
Yeah, and there's a good metaphor in that, which is that which is coming to accept that along with or part of the joy and satisfaction, happiness is frustration and drudgery. That's part of life. works. And again, I think I suppose as I've, obviously a bit older than you, but as I've matured a bit, I've tried to, I think I've got better at accepting the dark side within the light in a sense, because again, if I was to ask someone, are you happy every minute of every day? Is every single second of your life joyous and glorious? And if they said yes, I'd actually be worried. That'd just be really weird. But I think it takes, for some of us, for me anyway, it took a few years, I suppose, to come to accept the realities of life.
Yeah, and I think so. Then part of that, and the common theme here, is you just got to go through it. Like, it's not the avoidance of some of these feelings and emotions. Like, sometimes it's like, let yourself feel those emotions rather than like, okay, maybe I'm sad right now. Don't don't deliberately make yourself feel crap and feel sad, but be like, well, I'm sad. Like, sit with it, understand it, see what it's about, see what caused it. Maybe there is a way in the future where you could avoid that happening again, because there's a lot of lessons to learn in that. Whereas if you just completely put the wall up and don't get anything out of it, when there's always something to get out of a situation.
For sure. And in fact, as I write a lot about this in the book, and all of that plus more, because what we know is that, so firstly, you just can't not be unhappy. This is, again, it's just impossible for a human being to not be stressed at times, anxious at times, angry at times, frustrated. These are all normal human emotions. So imagining that you won't ever experience that or trying not to experience it is an impossible goal. It's an unrealistic goal. And as you know, if you set any unrealistic goal, you just set yourself up for failure. But more than that, if you try to repress or suppress or deny or fight any of those feelings, what we know from the research, and I write a lot about this, is they actually come back stronger. So the more you push something away, the more it'll push back. So if I'm feeling upset and I try to not be upset, and we do this in all sorts of ways. So we do that through drugs and alcohol. We do that through distraction. So distraction is one of the most common ones now. Even if people are just feeling bored, well, people don't feel bored anymore, because what do? They go onto their screens, and within 3 seconds, you've got all this stimulation, which is good and bad, et cetera, et cetera. But what we know is that it doesn't work. Well, it doesn't work in the long term. It works in the short term. Again, like alcohol, I suppose, you can feel good short term. But obviously long term, there are problems, there can be consequences. And even just with that distraction process, or that trying to take your mind off the distress, it's not going to go away. It's still there, and it's more likely to come back stronger and bigger and uglier tomorrow or next week when you eventually have to face it. So yeah, quite right. Learning to sit with it, which is easier said than done, but learning to sit with it and accept it and allow it is a far more effective, longer term strategy. Yeah,
it's interesting. There was I might butcher what animal this was, but I think it might have been like a buffalo or something like that, when they talk about in a tornado or something, all the cows run away from the tornado, whereas the buffaloes go straight through it, because they know that like they've instinctively known that, okay, it's going to hit them eventually, but they actually get through to the other side quicker and then can move on and live with that as well.
I think I've heard that before. I'm not sure if it's
whether it's true. Yeah.
But well, it's a good metaphor.
Yeah, exactly. So we should not necessarily. So we should step into these things, and then with that, are we doing that on our own? Should we be seeking some help sometimes as well? Because I think that's a common one. When I know personally, is like knowing who to have the conversations with. Sometimes do I do that myself, or with a friend, or with a professional?
All of the above, I suppose. Depends on the person, situation, etc. But again, I suppose we should say you don't have to do it all at once. So I guess I'll go back to the skydiving example. That's pretty extreme. I loved it. I'd always wanted to do it. When the opportunity came up, I'd been wanting to do it for years. So I just jumped at it.
Yeah,
literally and metaphorically. But for a lot of people, that's that is either not on their radar at all, or it's sort of something they might need to build up to. And I suppose that's one thing, is we can build up to these things. You don't have to jump in the deep end of the pool, again, literally or metaphorically. So you can build up to it slowly and gradually. And as a result, as you're doing that, gain confidence, gain skills, etc. The other part, as you've hinted at, is you don't have to do it all on your own. This idea, I think one of the biggest myths and mistakes that we've made, including myself, in the sort of whole self-development and self-help industry and movement over the decades, of which has been much good. Lots and lots of good stuff. But one of the myths is this, I guess even in the name, self-help. It's not just about the self. We don't just have to do it on our own. In fact, no one copes on their own. No one can do everything on their own. If my car breaks down, I go to a mechanic. If I've got a toothache, I go to the dentist. If my eyes are playing up, I go to the optometrist, etc., etc. Well, in the same way, if we need help psychologically, emotionally, whatever you want to call it, then, as you said, there's friends, there's family, there's different levels, and then there's professionals. So depending on who you are and what you're trying to face, there's almost always someone who can help you with that, do it with you, share the burden, etc. And that's, I guess it goes back to that idea of connection. That's super, super important and can be very valuable.
So for someone that's maybe we said before, some people don't have that connection. Where do you start?
Well, I think more people have help available and they don't realize it, or they don't want to accept it. There's a kind of a stigma, and dare I say it, especially with men, I suppose, this idea of reaching out for help. They think that it's a sign of weakness. Well, to be perfectly blunt, that's bullshit. It's not. No one considers themselves weak to go to the mechanic, a car mechanic. It's not weak. I don't have car mechanic skills. I'm not, and I don't have dental skills. So not everyone will have psychological skills, and that doesn't mean you're any worse or weaker than anyone else. It just means we can't be great at everything. We all need help with something or other. We need to get over this bullshit because it's killing people. It's killing men particularly. Excuse the language. I hope that's all right. But
No, definitely, yeah.
So I think that's one, and so I think a lot of the time people do. There is someone that's available. A boyfriend, a girlfriend, a husband, a wife, a mate, a colleague, whatever. It's more often than not, it's us not being willing to reach out and ask for help than the fact that there isn't help available. However, I suppose there are some people who, for whatever reason, either don't have that person available or don't think that person will be able to help. That might be the case. So, and I suppose that's when you might want to go to a professional. Now, I would obviously highly recommend that. I'm a bit biased. That's my life, I suppose, has been helping people professionally with that. But that's also expensive, I suppose. It's geographically difficult sometimes. So it's not necessarily as easily available as we'd like it to be. But there's some great resources online now. There's some great apps. So I suppose just find it wherever you can.
Yeah.
But find it somewhere.
Yeah. And I'm not saying like this would not solve everyone's problems as well, but I'd be very interested to look at whether you've seen what the research on this is, what the people that have the higher levels of the quote unquote depression and anxiety and all these terms as well, is where else in their life is lacking. Is it the job? Is it maybe they've got the friends, but they hate their job and they're not happy in their relationship, or all these other factors as well. It's like, how many of these things coming back to the self do we maybe have control over, but we kind of just have accepted that standard when we should be raising our standards because we're worth more than we're letting happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I'll answer it first in a slightly different way, but I think it's a really, really important to make because it's something I've been very passionate about sharing for quite a while now, and I don't think it gets enough attention in this area. I mean, the whole area of mental health gets a lot more attention these days, which is fantastic. I think it's more of us, we're having this conversation now. We probably wouldn't have had this 5 or 10 years ago. So I think that's really important because the more we talk about it, the easier it is for people to get help. But one thing that doesn't get talked about, and you mentioned depression and anxiety, which are the two big ones. So there's lots of different types of mental health, but they're the most common and most frequent, and so they get the most attention deservedly. But what a lot of people don't realize is that depression isn't one thing. It's talked about as this one type of illness, but it's not. There are different types of, so this is really important because if 5 people here have depression, the answers are not going to be the same because there's different types of depression, different causes. So each of us, each person with depression or anxiety, whatever it is, needs to really understand what's going on first before we can actually find out what the solution is. So, which comes back to your question. There's all sorts of possibilities. There can be significant external factors or factors that are relatively outside of our control, like financial strain, for example, like homelessness, or cost of living. All of these things, we only have limited control. We have some control over those things, and then there are other things over which we have much more control. The type of work we do, the sorts of goals we set ourselves, the extent to which we look after our physical health and well-being. I mean, I think that's actually one of the most underestimated contributors to psychological well-being. People think, or a lot of people think, going to the gym and exercising is a good thing for our bodies, which it is. You get muscle strength, you get cardiovascular fitness, you get flexibility. All of those things are fantastic, but it's also fantastic for our psychological well-being. Exercise, you probably know this, but exercise is a potent antidepressant. It's a stress buster. And that's something we can all do. Every one of us can. And because I use the term exercise in the broadest possible sense, many people love going to the gym, but that also has a cost. But you can go for a walk around the park, you can go for a run around the park, you can go for a swim in the ocean, you can ride a bike. There are lots of ways of exercising or moving our bodies that provide a lot of benefits that don't necessarily cost anything or not much at all. You don't need fancy $300 shoes or whatever. I mean, if you can afford it, fantastic.
Sure.
There's lots of great equipment, etc. So that is, and a lot of people, there are a lot of people who could benefit significantly from relatively simple things like exercising a bit more, eating a bit better, prioritizing sleep, rest, meditation, etc. Again, and a lot of those things don't cost a lot of money.
Yeah.
Again, and the other thing, which many of us could do better is reaching out, asking help, and fostering and developing our connectedness. Again, dare I say it, blokes tend to be probably a bit poor at this, but making a bit more effort to keep in touch with friends, to whatever it is, whether it's going to, as I said earlier, going to the pub and having a beer, or going for a cafe and having a coffee, or just going for a walk, round of golf, whatever it might be, it doesn't really matter. Just spending quality time with good people is, again, one of the simplest. And it doesn't have to cost a lot of money. Going for a walk around the park doesn't cost anything.
No.
But it can provide massive, massive benefits.
Yeah.
So I suppose come back. The first thing is really trying. What's the cause of? Is it your work? Is it finances? Is it physical health and well-being? Is it connectedness? And then addressing that as best you can.
Yeah, I'd be interested to hear whether let's take that blanket term of depression and anxiety, the two big ones that get thrown around a lot. A lot of people like to label themselves as, I have depression, I have anxiety, when they're just going through a period of hard times, sad times, whatever. Or is there a difference between someone that in medical world would say they are diagnosed with depression versus the depression that someone feels when they've financial stress, relationship stress, and all these other factors?
Yeah, it's a great question. With actually very complicated answers. I'll try and answer it as simply as possible. So in the old days, even before my time, and it's a long time ago, but before my training, they used to talk about endogenous depression and reactive depression. So there was this kind of broad distinction between, and endogenous depression was sort of what was considered to, and this is kind of out of favor a bit now, but it's still, some people still think about it this way. Endogenous depression was considered sort of a more biological, more longer lasting, you sort of almost like a depressive personality in a sense. It's probably not the correct way to think about it, but these are the people who are probably going to be a little bit unhappy or a lot unhappy for all the time, most of their life. And then reactive depression, I mean, the name's kind of self-explanatory, is more the sort of depression in reaction to a job loss, a relationship breakup. And the thinking was that, again, that first group, kind of probably going to always be a bit depressed, or what even before that was called melancholia. And then the other people might be depressed for days, weeks, months, depending on what it is, but will eventually recover. That thinking still holds true to some extent in the sense that there are, and he said there's different types of depression. So there are people who have what we would consider to be a kind of depressogenic personality or a style who will probably always, to some extent, be less happy than others. And there'll be some people, a lot of people who have a significant episode of depression in response to some, like a relationship breakup is obviously a really common one, particularly for those in their 20s. And that's kind of considered, that's a normal reaction. Of course, if you, going out, boyfriend, girlfriend, whatever it might be, 6 months, 12 months, whatever it might be, if that ends, of course you're going to be upset. That's a form of grief almost. But those people are then expected to recover, I suppose. So, it is, there are different ways of thinking about it. Different people will go through it. There are some people who will definitely have single episodes of, so it could be quite severe, but it's a single episode. And once that relationship breakup or financial problem or job or whatever, recovers, or once there's some sort of replacement for that, they will eventually bounce back, and they might never experience depression again. Yeah. So it is, and that's why again we shouldn't just think about all depression in the same way for everyone. Yeah.
So what's the difference? We're still seeing that there are people that have something in the brain that is the consistent factor of there, or is that almost like a bit of we're shooting ourselves in the foot by, if we kind of accept that a little bit, by there may be a lot of people that then claim that, it's just the way I am, when there are factors that we could not necessarily them on their own with the right help could get through it as well.
Well, I'm gonna present a caveat to this and say that my opinion on this is somewhat extreme, but it's an opinion I've come to based on a lot of reading, a lot of research, and something I feel quite strongly about. There are many, many people who refer to depression as a biological imbalance, or some sort of biological imbalance in the brain. I'm yet to be convinced that there's any good research to support that. Now, that doesn't mean there aren't biological factors involved. There's almost certainly biological factors involved in everything we do. But I'm yet to be convinced that that's a significant contributing factor for the majority of people. My opinion, based on the research, and again, I'll openly say this, a lot of people would disagree with me on this. I write about this in the book, and I'm sure some people are going to disagree with it. If we look at all of the people with depression, and you can say the same about other forms of mental health, I believe it's probably only a very small percentage of people for whom there is some sort of neurotransmitter imbalance. Mm-hmm. So I think there probably are some, but not necessarily. I think by far the majority of people who are experiencing depression as a result of what we might call psychosocial factors, lifestyle factors, thinking, cognitive factors, etc. And as a result, the solution for them is psychosocial intervention, or cognitive behavior therapy is the most prevalent psychological therapy has been for the last 50 years or so, and proven to be effective. There's other versions of that, but in answer to your question, I think we need to be a bit careful of that, because what that then means is if I attribute my depression to biological factors, then I think there has to be a biological cure or treatment. And that's not always necessarily helpful. It doesn't necessarily give people the sense of control that I would like them to have over their life. That doesn't mean medications aren't appropriate at times. Doesn't mean there aren't biological interventions that will help. Of course they help people at times. But I do believe, I think we've been slightly misled in some ways in that area for many, many years now.
Yeah, I think that's quite empowering though for people, because what it means is it's like I have plenty of people, I just can't lose weight, my metabolism, my this, my that, and it's like, you can. Like it's not going to mean it's easy. That's the completely different thing. It's like I always say, for a concept that people might be easy understanding of is, weight loss is simple, not easy.
Yeah. And
much like it might be a similar sort of context here. Like this is maybe not so simple in the same context there, but we looked at those factors we talked about. Are you getting sunlight? Are you eating well? Are you exercising? Do you have a job that fulfills you? Do you have a loving household? 5 massive factors already that we go, all right, if we're ticking those now, you've probably solved a lot of people's that we speak to on a day, like anecdotally that I talk to anyone that says I'm feeling depressed or down or sad. You look at those 5 factors and there's probably something missing there for a lot of people. Similarly, all right, it doesn't mean it's going to be easy. If you have to break off a job or a relationship, that's not easy. But it's going to make a massive impact. I
think I agree 100%. And I think it's a useful metaphor, the weight loss one, because again, I think that there's no doubt there are genetic contributing factors. There's no doubt at all. Some people are predisposed to different body types. I think that's pretty bloody obvious. But that doesn't mean we can't change it. Those genetic factors don't explain 100% of the variance without getting sort of too boring with the statistics. So what that means is that there are some people who will always be what we might call more overweight or have different sort of body shape than others. Not everyone can have a supermodel body, whether you want that or not.
No. Or bone structure and things like this that
on the
change.
cover of Men's Health magazine, whatever it might be. And again, not everyone wants to be that, but that doesn't mean that some people that you can't go to the gym or exercise in some way, improve your diet, etc., and lose some weight and or become more toned, change your body shape in some way or other. And I think so. It's the same with depression. I think there's no doubt there's no doubt at all that genetics plays some role, as it does with almost everything in life. And that doesn't mean I can't. If I'm predisposed towards depression, which I am, that doesn't mean I can't do things in my daily life that will make me feel a bit happier more often. And I suppose I actually talk about this a lot. One of the simple sort of metaphors, or I guess examples that I often give, is that I can swim. I've grown up in Sydney, lived on the beach, so I swim, and I can swim pretty competently, but I'm not fantastic at it. If I really wanted to, I could go to the local pool, find a swimming coach, train every day or 3 times a week or whatever. And if I did that for a certain period of time, I would become a better swimmer. Yeah. I'd become faster and stronger, and I could swim for longer, etc., etc. But I would never be able to beat Ian Thorpe, or I'm never going to become an Olympic gold medalist, or if I did the same with running, I'm never going to beat Usain Bolt or whatever. So there's a limit to how much I can achieve, but I can improve. And I think you could say the same with weight loss, with depression. Not all of us will become Olympic gold medalists, but we can become better.
Yeah, I think, and it's once again, that common word there, it's very empowering because there are things you can do about it. Now you mentioned, I think you've talked about how, like, much like phones, we need a recharge. You know, you use your phone throughout the day, you plug it in at nighttime. Much like us, we need our sleep, we need our downtime. How important is it that we have those times of, I guess, quiet, maybe even boredom?
Super important. Well, there's actually two parts to that. So there's sleep and rest, which are kind of related, almost like first cousins in a way, but they're also a bit different. And this is something I've been very, very passionate about for a long time. So the first book I wrote was actually on sleep, The Good Sleep Guide. And I wrote that because for a number of reasons. One, so as I mentioned, and I've talked a lot about this, I've experienced mental health myself, particularly depression and anxiety. And one of the most significant causes, particularly years ago, was poor sleep, was insomnia. So I found that when I was able to improve my sleep, which is very possible, my mood improved significantly. And a lot of people will be able to relate to that. It's a very, very common problem. So sleep is actually a central part of many people's quality of life and mental health, et cetera, et cetera. So sleep is one of the most underestimated, or improving your sleep, I think, is one of the most underestimated health and wellbeing strategies. And the good news is that for most people, it's distinctly possible. There's a range of sleep disorders, but the most common is insomnia. It's like 80 or 90% of people with sleep problems will have insomnia. And then for 80 or 90% of them, the main cause is worry or stress, which again is very, very treatable. So the majority of us who have trouble sleeping can improve that. And as a result, feel a hell of a lot better. Like we have more energy, you can concentrate better. You know, it affects your energy, your attention, your concentration, your mood, your relationships, your performance at work, et cetera, et cetera. So sleep is super, super important. And you know, the other way to think about that is if you think about lack of sleep or sleep deprivation, I mean, that is so seriously bad that people use it as torture. You know, you've probably seen it in movies, or if you've read history, war stuff. It's used as a form. That's how serious it is to not get sleep. People use it as a torture mechanism, and many of us do that to ourselves. We inflict that on, which is absurd. So sleep is super, super important. Without it, our health and well-being just plummets, and eventually it will have significant, serious consequences. Rest is slightly different, but I would say almost as important in a different way. We weren't designed to go non-stop all the time. The way many of us live our lives now is just ridiculous, really. And I think, and many of us know it, because we feel the effects. We're exhausted all the time. We forget things all the time. We make mistakes. We get irritable. A lot of that comes from just not allowing ourselves to sleep enough, enough and good quality. There's quantity and quality, but also to rest, just to take time out. And this is something I also talk about in the book. So the book's called Lost and Found. It's also about, so the lost bit is not just losing our way in life and enjoying the benefits of that, but letting our minds get lost, letting our minds wander. If you're in many workplaces now, if someone was seen, for example, sitting at their desk staring out a window, most people would think they're wasting time. Why aren't you working harder? Why aren't you doing more? But we know from the research that sometimes, and I'm not advocating wasting time, by the way. I'm not advocating sort of slacking off. But what we know from the research is that allowing your mind to wander at times can actually be associated with creativity and innovation and problem solving. So some of us have our best ideas when we just stare out the window, or even just go for a walk around the block to get some fresh air, etc. So, and that's a form of mental rest. It's kind of physical and mental rest. But anyway, the simple answer is that very, very important. We need them. If you don't think you do, well, just go nonstop, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and see what happens.
Good luck. It's interesting because I think that you talking about like the sitting there staring at the wall is that it's not a measurable way of seeing progress, so therefore we kind of neglect it. Like you can't look and be like, oh, you've written X amount of words, or you've edited X amount of videos, so it kind of doesn't appear to be progress. But if you then ask that person after they stared at the wall for 30 minutes and you went, what did you get out of that? And they just had they solved this problem, that problem, you'd be like, oh shit, that's pretty good, isn't it?
Well, no, I think I slightly disagree, because I think you would see that measurable progress, but in the medium to longer term.
Yeah, okay.
And that's so this is this upsets me so much. A lot of the work I've done is around workplaces and positive culture in workplace and even performance in workplaces. And there's this ridiculous idea that people need to sit at a desk 8 hours a day or more to be productive. And so this issue came up through COVID and through remote working and working from many managers and bosses were afraid, well, I can't see this person. I can't see them at their desk. And in fact, some organizations did keystroke mapping to actually see if they were on their computers and stuff. The idea being, this which is complete bullshit. But the idea being, if someone is at their desk for a certain amount of time and working more, they will somehow be more productive and better, which is rubbish. Because it's all about quantity, not quality. And we all know, any of us that have worked in an organization know there are people that might be there for longer. It doesn't necessarily mean they're doing better work. But there are people, and what does that mean? If you can do something, if I do something in 30 minutes and you do it in 15 minutes, who's better? Like, it's almost like, so in the old way, it's like, I'm better than you because I took longer to do it, which is ridiculous.
So if you just do it slow, then
but that's what a lot of workplaces reinforce, which is not really healthy in many, many ways. So, but to come back to your point again, if we look at quality over medium to longer term, so I do think workplaces do need to map goals and outcomes. If I'm paying you to do something, I do want to know that you're doing that thing, but that doesn't mean measuring every second or every minute of what you're doing. If I set you a task, most of those tasks are going to take a day, days, weeks, or whatever. That's what I want to look at. What you achieve. Let's just say a week. Arbitrary figure. But have you achieved that goal over the course of that week? And if you do, I shouldn't really care how you do it. If you're staring out the windows for 5 minutes, who cares? As long as you get what I want you to be done in a reasonable period of time. And I think that's what the better workplaces do. They let people work in their own ways because, again, we're all different. And not everyone wants to stare out the window, but there might be other ways that they will sort of switch off temporarily, whatever. And we should be allowed to do that.
It's interesting because it's a hard one to navigate. Maybe I know, say personally, I'm very good at leaving things to the last minute and getting them done at a high standard. I've done it all through school, did my assignments the night before, still got good grades, did all of these things. Go to a boss and be like, no, you don't mind if I do nothing all week and then just do it the night before. They'll be like, what? Like, it just seems ridiculous. Whereas if they could tap in and be like, give me shorter timelines, I may be productive.
But that shouldn't matter.
No.
Again, if your job is to produce X, Y, and Z, why should I care when or how you do it? I mean, I think this is the biggest mistake a lot of work. I mean, within reason, I suppose. There's obviously some extremities of this, but I think within reason, if I'm a boss, I don't really care how you go about it, when you, because the other way of thinking about it, so we know for a fact, again, there's a lot of really good research into this, that some people work better in the mornings, some people work better in the nights, for example. So some people are actually, they like to wake up at 6 o'clock, whatever. Their brains are just fully functioning by 7 and they're off racing. Other people can barely string a sentence together till 11 or midday or whatever, but that should be okay. Well, again, we're all different. And if I want to come in and work from 6 till 2, why not let me do that? If you want to start at midday and work till 8, why not? I mean, within reason. I mean, some teams need to be able to interact with each other. So there's some limits to this. It can't just be completely sort of free for all. But I have absolutely no doubt at all, and I think there's really good research that if we allowed people to work to their own rhythms, in their own ways more often, they would actually be more productive.
Now, selfishly, I want to rewind to the sleep thing because this is something I struggle with a lot. So, and I imagine it's very common in people that have goals and aspirations that maybe we've stretched the unrealistic boundary a little bit there as well. Head hits the pillow and the brain just, the stress, the what tomorrow, the this or that. I've done I've started to do the whole journal and write some things down, and it definitely helps a little bit. But what are some other things that people can be doing if they're struggling with their sleep on that sort of level?
Well, so that's the main. So I'll go back a step. So as I said earlier, that there are a whole bunch of sleep disorders. But if we just talk about insomnia, which again makes up, I think 80% or more than 80% of sleep disorders, and then within insomnia, 80 or 90% is caused by worrying, racing mind, etc. is what we referred to. So this is most people who have sleep difficulties will experience something like what you've just described. And so the answer then is learning to manage those worrying, ruminating thoughts or those stresses in other ways. So how do we do that? There's a couple of ways to do that. Firstly, it's not easy. It's easier said than done. I think that is important to state because when I get to describing the solutions, they can sound, like you said earlier, the difference between simple and easy, they can sound relatively simple, and they are in some ways, but anyone that's tried any of this knows that it's easier said than done. So I just wanted to preface this by saying, I know, and I still have trouble sleeping at times. I'm a lot better than I used to be. Yep. But even someone who's quote unquote an expert, it's still difficult. So to come back, there's a couple of things that can really help. One of the most important things for sleep is routine. So having a good sleep. And I know you've probably got a younger audience out there, but anyone that's been a parent of a younger child, like a baby, an infant, knows how important routine is to sleep. It's one of the most important things that's recommended all the times when you've got a baby, for those first few years, is routine. And that includes sort of a warm up to sleep period and then the sleep period. But what people forget there is that we're still essentially the same. We're, biologically the same. And routine is just important to us as adults as it is to those babies and infants. So what does that routine involve? So from, let's just say, I'm just going to, again, make an arbitrary number. Let's just say your sleep time is 10 p.m., but obviously that can vary again. But it's, it's probably a pretty average for many, many people. So, but obviously adjust this up or down depending on where, there's no perfect answer to that. But let's just say your sleep time, and this is when you want to go to sleep, which is not the same as going to bed, is 10 p.m. What we know from the research is that at least 90 minutes before that, you want to get off screens. So this is one of the most difficult things for everyone to say. Get off your screens, get off your devices as best you can, turn everything off. Because there's a number of reasons for that. One, there's a very basic level of stimulation that comes from the light that comes from screens. And even though some devices these days over recent years, they've changed the type of light or changed the way, it still affects us in a way. So it sends a message to the brain that's essentially still saying, be alive, be alert, be alive, etc. So this is the ideal. Get off your devices, get off your screens, do something instead that's calming, relaxing. So ideally reading a book or talking to a partner, whatever it might be. What you want to do in those final 90 minutes, it should be as non-stimulating as possible. A hot bath in winter, obviously. Some people like smelly candles, whatever it might be, but we want to avoid or minimize all stimulation in that 90 minutes and allow our brains time to switch off, because this is something many of us forget to do. We go full on stimulation, work, whatever it might be. 10 o'clock comes, okay, put it down, go to sleep, and expect our brains to just switch off like that. It's not like flicking a switch on a light. Our brains don't work like that, or many of us don't. If you can do that, fantastic. But so we need to allow, and then even before that 90-minute period, the better we can set ourselves up. Our bodies respond to routines in all areas of life, and the more we can set ourselves up through the mid to late afternoon, early evening, to gradually, and again, I'm speaking in very general terms here because we're all different, but to gradually wind down.
Yep.
So whenever, again, I just totally random arbitrary number, let's just say you sort of finish work at 6 o'clock or whatever. I know it's going to vary, but from that 6 till 9 time, whatever, you want to be gradually winding down, gradually getting away from stimulation. So if it's work that's a problem, find a time when you put that down. So set a limit for yourself, whatever that might be. And again, there's no perfect answer, but let's just say, okay, from 7:30, no more work.
Yep.
Now, what's likely to happen then, if you do that, is, and particularly in the early stages, it's still going to come into your head. Stuff's going to pop up, ideas, and that's not entirely bad. But what I would ideally recommend then is, again, not on your device, but paper and pen. Go old school. There's something very, very different. Write it down. Just keep a notebook, keep a pad by your bed or wherever, however your house is set up, and write down these ideas. So, okay, I've got this great idea, fantastic. I don't want to lose that idea, but I'll come back to it tomorrow. Because if I work on this now, I'm going to be exhausted tomorrow and then I won't be able to do anything. So we need to be able to recognize that if we think about these things all night, it's actually not very productive. It's not very healthy. It's not good for us. Then if you do go to bed and you're lying in bed at 9:30 and that idea pops into your head again, just remind yourself, I've written it down, I'll get to it tomorrow. And you probably need to do that multiple times. The next thing that also then helps then is some form of meditation or relaxation or mindfulness practice. There's all sorts of different variations of that, and I probably don't have time to go into them in detail now. But there's no doubt that learning how to, I said mindfulness, meditation, relaxation are all different but similar. The common element throughout all of that in some way or other is learning how to control our minds, or learning how to control the attention of our minds, I suppose. And so what we want to be doing at that period of time is not necessarily thinking about things that are going to distract us or disturb our sleep, but think instead of something simple, something calming, etc. So again, different things work for different people. I have a meditation practice that I've developed over many, many years, which is sort of really a combination of a variety of different things. But at night time, I use that regularly. And if I wake at 2 or 3 in the morning, I use that again regularly. So routine through the early afternoon. And then there's other simple things like, avoiding stimulants through the afternoon, like caffeine and energy drinks, etc. Ideally, those things can have an effect on your system for, well, depending on what they are, 5 or 6 hours. So if you're having one of those strong energy drinks or a strong coffee at, say, 4 or 5 in the afternoon, that might still be buzzing through your brain by 9 or 10, which is not ideal. Now, again, we're all different. There are some people that have a coffee after dinner and still fall asleep fine. If that's you, good luck to you. But if we're having problems and we're trying to maximize it, best, avoid stimulants after really 2 o'clock in the afternoon sort of thing, depending on roughly. Avoid stimulants, start to wind down as best you can through that sort of 4, 5, 6 p.m. time or whatever. It doesn't mean you've got to stop doing everything, but gradually let your body and your brain slow down, shift away from screens as best you can to paper and pen if you need to, and find other things to do in that evening, which again are calming rather than stimulating.
I guess the stimulant thing probably leads down to the path also of the alcohol and things like that. Right. Like the conversation you hear, but I sleep better when I drink. It's like, you're not hitting a deep sleep though when you drink alcohol as well. Like, it's kind of cool. You might close your eyes and you sleep, but the quality is so low, similar to maybe you do even with the caffeine. Like, cool, you sleep because you had a coffee at 7 o'clock at night. Doesn't mean your sleep quality is high necessarily either, which still has a massive impact also.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. So I didn't talk about alcohol, but that's, I suppose in an ideal world, health experts will probably say don't drink any alcohol ever. There's a bit of debate about that, and I'm sort of, I probably sit on the fence a bit with that. I think there's no doubt that alcohol is a much underestimated drug. I think we take it for granted a lot, or we think it's a lot safer than it is. But I also think that having a drink with a mate, for example, can enhance that social connectedness that we talked about before, which is super, super important. So excessive alcohol, which a lot of people do without realizing it, is a massive problem. Mild to moderate levels might be okay, but you're quite right. A lot of people don't realize the impact it has on their sleep. So if we just come back to the sleep issue, you're 100% right. 1 or 2 drinks might help you fall asleep, but it will almost certainly disrupt your sleep through the night, will affect the quality of your sleep. I mean, if nothing else, if you've got a full bladder, you've got to get up to go for a bit. So, at the very least, it's going to affect your sleep in that way, let alone the brain activity, etc. So, yeah, you're definitely right. And it is, it's so taken for granted and so accepted in our society, we forget sometimes that it's a drug.
Yeah, 100%. How important is gratitude in someone's overall mental health?
Gratitude's a super one. It's one of those. It is one of those things that's almost ridiculously simple, and it is pretty simple to do in a way, and super powerful. So gratitude fits into a group of constructs that I refer to that all in a way come under what you might call mindset or attitude or whatever. So there's gratitude, there's hope, there's optimism, mindset. All slightly different, but all similar. All ways of thinking about the world, thinking about ourselves and our world and the world more generally. So again, they're all a bit different, but there's no doubt, if we look at the research, and I know this from personal experience, that happier people focus more on what they have and less on what they don't have. Those people that practice gratitude on a regular basis are happier and healthier, etc. And again, thankfully, it's a relatively simple thing to do. If you pause, so this is a great thing to fit into that evening routine. As you're winding down, ideally with a paper and pen, pull out your notepad and write down, what are 3 good things in your life? What are 3 things you're thankful for? What are 3 things that have gone well that day? Whatever it might be. Again, we know that people that do that regularly are happier. It is, as I said, it's a relatively simple thing to do.
How do you navigate that when you go, like the whole, you're grateful for your situation or whatever, but you may still, you're feeling something you like, the financial stress, it's there, but then you go, but I'm still very grateful for X, Y, and Z. It's like, well, that doesn't remove what I'm going through, but then someone goes, but someone's going through worse, so I probably should be grateful regardless of my situation. There's always that, I find personally, even that overarching thing of, someone's got it worse, just get through it, you'll be fine.
Definitely, great question. And so that is a challenge. But the point is, being grateful for what you have, it doesn't mean you have to ignore what's not going well. So no one's life is ever perfect. My life's not perfect. I'm sure your life's not perfect. I'm sure everyone out there. But that doesn't mean the fact that you have problems, which we all do, doesn't mean you can't be grateful for what's going well. And they're not, they're not mutually exclusive. So the fact that if I was to sit down right now and write down 3 things or think about or say 3 things in my life that are going well, that doesn't mean everything's going well. It doesn't mean there aren't issues I need to address. It doesn't mean there aren't problems I need to tackle or get help with or whatever. But the point is, if we spend all our time thinking about those problems, well, what does that achieve? We just get upset, we get stressed, we don't necessarily function as well. So we need to do both. We do need to address those problems. We do need, if you've got financial issues, get help with it. See a planner, talk to someone who can help you budget, whatever it might be. But that shouldn't detract. It doesn't necessarily need to detract everything from those other areas of your life. And it's the same thing with, if you think about it on a global level, there's no doubt there are many problems in the world. Absolutely no doubt. You don't need to turn on the news or whatever, however you consume your news. There's some pretty shitty things happening out there. And for some of us, that's distressing. I get upset all the time about global issues or national issues. But if that's all I think about, I could get very upset about that.
Yeah.
What does that achieve? It doesn't change those situations. All it does is make me more miserable, my life more miserable, which makes me less likely to cope with things, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a bit of a balance. I mean, I guess what I try to do is look at whether it's at a global level or even in my life, I look at those problems that, so what can I do about it? So this is another part of that mindset that psychologists sometimes call solution-focused thinking. So what can I do about those things? If I can do something to solve a problem, then I'm going to try and do it. Whether it's in my life or the world, more, if I can solve some world problem, I'll try and do it. But if it's beyond my control, as many of those things are, or at least partially, well, what help? What does that achieve? It doesn't achieve. In fact, all it achieves is me becoming miserable, curling up in a corner, and that doesn't help anyone really. So, do what you can. I guess it goes back. There's a thing that's sometimes referred to serenity prayer, which you might be familiar with. So, do what you can do. Change what you can change, fix what you can fix, but accept that which you can't change. And again, the unfortunate reality is there's many aspects of the world, many aspects of our lives that we can't change. We can't make it, and it won't ever be perfect.
No.
And then the key, so do what you can do, accept what you can't do, and then be wise enough to know the difference. And that's the real tricky bit. It's being, knowing when to fight, when to push hard, when to try and do something, and knowing when to say, okay, I've just got to accept that. And that's, we won't always get that right.
I know I'd add another layer in there that I find just from dealing with your then decision you've made at the end of that is you're not a bad person for that either, because this is something I'm sure many people battle with. I know I battle with this as well. It's like not necessarily ignoring those issues in the world or even in your local area or national, like you said, there's so many different things, but I can't change it. Therefore, why am I going to let it have a massive impact over how I feel on the day-to-day basis and what I do, like you've just said there, tick, tick, tick. But then not sitting there and be like, oh, maybe I should, maybe this or maybe that. Like, oh, does that make me a bad person? It's like, no, it doesn't. It really doesn't.
I can very much relate to that. And I wrote about this a lot in the book, actually. So first, I'm what, I didn't even know what I was for many, many years, because when I was growing up, they didn't have words for it. But I'm now people often refer to, I am what people often refer to as an empath or a highly sensitive person. So I care a lot about things. I care too much about some things, and that's not necessarily good for me. But it is also what makes me who I am, and it is also what makes me a good person in a way, because I do care and I do try to help. So, but I need to be very careful about limiting what I care about sometimes, or limiting the extent to which I will allow that to affect me, as a husband, as a father. If I get so miserable about world events, which I can sometimes do, that turns me into a shitty husband or father. Well, that's not really what I want to do, etc. So I need to be very conscious of. It's not about not caring, but putting a circle around that care to some extent, putting a circle around how much I let that. But then the other bit is, and again, this is something I've become a very strong advocate of more and more in recent years, and it's a big part in the book, is what I call what's called self-compassion, which is being gentle with ourselves, being kind to ourselves, recognizing that we're all imperfect. If there's anyone out that's perfect, good luck to you. I think you're probably kidding yourself.
Yeah, you're lying.
But no, it almost sounds ridiculously obvious to say that we're all imperfect, but sometimes we forget that. We should get it all right all the time. Or why did I stuff that up? Well, you stuffed it up because you're a human. Yeah. Because you're a human being who will stuff up sometimes, and that shouldn't be a surprise. We should be able to accept that. So that's really, self-compassion is recognizing that we're imperfect, we're fallible, we make mistakes, as too is everyone else. But the thing is, we will often, if we were mates and you made some mistake, I would probably be much kinder to you than I'd be to myself.
Yeah.
You know, I often say things to myself, you bloody idiot, you hopeless so-and-so. I would never say that to my mates. So self-compassion that's the third bit, is that, so, you know, we're fallible, we make mistakes, everyone does. But if we can give ourselves the same kindness that we would, you know, our best mate, a, you know, loved one, a girlfriend, whoever it might be, then that's key. You know, again, if I said to myself the things I'd say to my kids, or to a good friend, I'd be much better off.
Yeah, it's amazing that. And I think interestingly, I'm in the world currently, like the self-love movement is a massive thing online. Everyone, whatever aspect that is, whether that's physically or mentally. And I think true self-love is also that acceptance, like you've said, accepting that I'm not perfect, therefore I still can change and get better. Whereas a lot of what gets pushed around as well online, I see, is that, you know, you are enough, you're perfect, you're this, you're that. And the answer is like, no, like it's you're, especially if you're like my age, 24, no, you haven't got it all figured out. No, you're not perfect. Yes, you're still learning. You know, there's so much you can continue to improve. So if you tell yourself you're perfect, you're actually limiting your ability to grow, but that doesn't mean you're also putting yourself down. You know, it's not necessarily a lack thereof.
I agree. I think, and so, you know, I wrote about this in the book. That, so I actually talk about the different. There's self-compassion, there's self-love, there's self-confidence. There's a whole range of sort of terms that are used sort of almost interchangeably, but I don't think they are the same. And I agree. I think this idea, you know, we should all love ourselves because we're all perfect the way we are. We are not perfect. I just can't see how that can make sense to say that I'm perfect as I am. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It shouldn't be a bad thing to say you're imperfect, because, you know, unless you're, you know, I don't know, the Buddha or Jesus Christ or whatever, you know, unless you believe in some sort of celestial being that's come down to earth, we're humans, and part of being human means fucking up sometimes. So this idea of loving ourselves because we're perfect, I don't actually agree with. I think it's about loving ourselves because we're imperfect, or despite being imperfect, which is a subtle but important difference, I think.
Yeah, and it gives you something a purpose, I guess, then as well, because if you had that perfection, what's the point?
Well, it's like, so to come back to, I spend a lot of time in the gym. You probably can't notice it now, but I stopped going to the gym through COVID. I still exercise at home, but I spent many, many years working really hard in the gym and really enjoying it with a great personal trainer who became a good mate or whatever. Which I thoroughly enjoyed, and got so many benefits out of it. But what I found really interesting is there'd be people, all sorts of people at the gym working really hard, but looking completely different. And part of that was because they wanted to look really different. They had very different goals. So, for example, my goal was primarily training for functional training. So I wanted to train so I could do things in life. You know, I love bushwalking, I love camping. You know, when my kids were young, I wanted to play with them, whatever. It wasn't necessarily to bulk up or get really big. But that was some other people, and that's okay. So if your goal was to get really big, you would work out, your workouts would be different. And then there are other people who are training for triathlons or marathon. Again, training would be very different. So I suppose the point I'm making is that because we all had different goals, we trained in different ways, and the outcomes were different. And that's life. You know, we shouldn't all want to look the same, and we won't. And even if you look at all those people, who's perfect then? You know, the marathon runner with, you know, 6% body fat and, you know, but who can barely lift 10 kilos, or the power lifter who's, you know, thumping up hundreds of kilos or whatever, but can barely run down the road. There's no such thing as perfect. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I guess there's a massive craze at the moment in the fitness industry, the hybrid athlete, where they're all like, I can run X far and I can lift the weights. And it's like, once again, that still doesn't mean it's perfect, because I could always add another layer. Like, as I've just started doing jiu-jitsu, and I'm like, well, do you have self-defense? But in doing that, maybe I can't lift as much weight. And there's always going to be layers. And if you can, to yourself, explain why you're doing it and it makes sense to you, it's probably okay.
Exactly. I think it's fascinating. And as a personal trainer, it's probably really interesting as well, because you're helping different people in different ways. But that's how we need to think about life. Again, my life goals, I'm sure, are not the same as your life goals. And why would we expect them to be? You know, of course we're not. And, you know, everyone else out there would have different goals, different aspirations, which is great. But what that also means is that we need to live our lives differently. And no one of them is perfect. And no one of us will do any of our ways perfectly. So this idea of it's just, you know, it's almost absurd again.
Yeah, and not pushing those onto other people as well. This is I think relationships, this is probably a really common one that people see is, or the fitness goals definitely still as well. It's like, just because even your best mate, who may have very different tastes in a partner, maybe like, oh, well, why would you want to be with them? It's like, because that's what I want in a relationship, whereas what you want is very different. And we don't have to have the same partners, nor if you walk down the street and someone was like, you know, just the dynamic of your, you know, maybe someone's a little bit more old school with the very stringent masculine and feminine sort of dynamic. Well, both of those people might be happy with that versus a different household that wants a bit more of a 50-50 more, you know, combination to some extent there. And it's like, well, if they're happy or content with that situation, just be, you don't have to try and push your wants onto them as well.
Well, you can't.
Yeah.
Well, if you try, you're just going to be miserable and cause other people to be miserable. So.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we might wrap things up there. I really appreciate your time, Tim. And if anyone's looking for an excellent book, then Lost and Found is out and ready to be read.
Thanks for having me. It was a great chat.
Excellent. Thank you.